I can finally start my life over, Robert said cheerfully, his expensive pen smoothly signing the divorce settlement. On the glass coffee table sat the legal papers, and quietly pushed to the side was my heavy clinical trial protocol binder. Beside my now ex-husband sat Jessica, wearing a bright floral sundress. She flashed a glamorous, condescending smile. "You have worked so hard for so long. Take a rest. I will be the one supporting him from now on." I did not yell. I simply stared at the binder. Robert looked immaculate, genuinely believing his affluent CEO mindset had cured his rare autoimmune disease. Hearing those words, my fingertips went ice cold. He had absolutely no idea. If you've ever had your silent sacrifices mocked by the very people you kept alive, tell me where and what time you're listening to this story. I did not demand half of his tech company right there at the table. I did not scream in tears, nor did I throw a glass at the wall. For 20 years, I had learned that reacting emotionally to Robert only fed his towering, fragile ego. Instead, I quietly picked up my purse and stood up from the designer sofa. "Just make sure you bring that binder to your next clinical evaluation," I said. My voice was perfectly even, maintaining the exact same detached tone I used when reviewing complex insurance claims at my firm. In my line of work as a senior insurance appraiser, I evaluate risk. I calculate the precise statistical probability of failure. Robert was a walking catastrophic failure, held together entirely by my daily invisible interventions. Robert scoffed, adjusting his expensive Italian silk tie. "Jessica will take care of all that. You can finally be free from nursing me." Jessica nodded enthusiastically, her hand resting gently on his arm. "Yes, I will manage everything perfectly. Do not worry about a single thing." I did not say another word. The two people sitting across from me were completely intoxicated by the expectation of a shiny, glamorous new life. Robert truly believed that he had been fighting his illness all by himself. He thought his wealth and his sheer willpower kept him breathing, completely blind to the fact that I had spun a calculated life-saving web throughout this Beacon Hill mansion. Morning, noon, and night, I was the one calculating the exact half-life of his experimental medications to prevent severe organ failure. I was the one catching the subtle, terrifying signs of a midnight flare-up, making split-second clinical judgments on whether to administer an emergency injection or call for an ambulance. I carried all of that weight alone, balancing it with a grueling corporate career. Yet year after year, Robert threw the exact same phrase at me. "You work in insurance and healthcare anyway. You are used to this sort of thing, right?" I turned my back to them and walked toward the grand entryway. My steps felt miraculously light on the hardwood floor. From behind me, I could hear their joyful, giddy laughter. When I pulled open the heavy cedar front door, the cool afternoon breeze brushed against my cheeks. The moment the door clicked shut, the suffocating, heavy air that had bound me to this house instantly dissipated. I stood on the porch for a brief second, breathing in the crisp Boston air. It was exactly 4:15 in the afternoon. At this precise minute, I was officially no longer his personal medical device. I didn't look back. Walking toward the subway station, I pulled my smartphone from my purse. The city skyline was bathed in the warm golden light of the late afternoon, but my mind was entirely focused on the administrative protocol I needed to execute. I opened my contacts and tapped the familiar direct line to the medical board of the Immunology Research Institute. After 2 rings, the head receptionist answered, "Immunology Research, this is Diane." "Diane, this is Angela," I said, my voice clear and unwavering as I stopped at the corner of the street. "I am calling regarding the emergency contact and clinical caregiver registration for Robert." "Oh, hi, Angela. Do you need to adjust his appointment for next week?" "No," I replied smoothly. "Effective immediately, I am terminating my status as his licensed clinical caregiver and his medical proxy. Please direct all future emergency notifications, clinical trial consent forms, and liability waivers to him directly or to his new partner." I could hear Diane sharply inhale on the other end of the line. A long, heavy silence stretched between us. Revoking a medical proxy in a standard hospital is one thing, but doing so within a highly restricted Tier 1 clinical trial for a complex, intractable autoimmune disease is an entirely different matter. It is not a simple clerical update. It means completely severing the vital legal pipeline between the research physicians and the patient. Hospitals are massive emotionless machines. They do not care about a CEO's ego or a mistress's bright sundress. They care about liability, compliance, and authorized signatures. By revoking my proxy, I was actively telling the machine that Robert was now an unmonitored rogue variable. "Angela, are you absolutely sure?" Diane's voice trembled slightly. As a medical professional, she understood the catastrophic weight of this request. "If we remove you from the protocol, the system will flag him as an extreme liability." "I am absolutely sure. My divorce was finalized an hour ago," I stated calmly. "Understood. I will process the revocation and inform his attending physician, Dr. Cameron, right away." "Thank you, Diane." I hung up the phone and let out a long, deep exhale. Robert still did not know. He was sitting in his luxurious living room laughing with a woman who thought his highly toxic medication was a daily vitamin. He had absolutely no idea what a terrifying legal and medical safety net he had just discarded. His daily life as a high-powered tech executive had only functioned so smoothly because I was constantly behind the scenes, doing the dirty work, analyzing his lab results, and meticulously keeping the administration at bay. In exactly 3 days, Robert would take his new mistress to his regular clinical checkup. He had severed his own lifeline. Before I even stepped onto the subway train, my mind briefly flashed back to the quiet morning hours just before the divorce signing. While Robert was out finalizing the purchase of a new sports car with Jessica, I was in his home office. I had plugged a secure flash drive into the network. With methodical precision, I had downloaded and encrypted 20 years of his physical reactions, medication adjustments, and detailed clinical overrides that I had personally engineered. It was not just data. It was the irrefutable legal proof of my invisible labor. I had safely tucked that drive into my purse, leaving only the hard copy binder on the coffee table. I left nothing to chance. The train rattled beneath the city, carrying me far away from the affluent bubble of Beacon Hill. 45 minutes later, I stepped off at a quiet, gray suburban station. I walked 2 blocks until I reached a faded brick building. The sign out front read Valley View Care Center. It was a rundown, underfunded nursing home that smelled faintly of cheap bleach and boiled cabbage. The floor tiles were scuffed, and the fluorescent lights hummed with a depressing buzz. I walked past rooms where elderly patients stared blankly at muted televisions. This was the environment Robert deemed sufficient for the man who had worked double shifts to put me through college. I walked down the dim linoleum hallway until I reached room 112. I gently pushed the door open. Sitting in a worn-out armchair by a small window was Walter, my 72-year-old father. He looked up, his gentle eyes crinkling at the corners when he saw me. "Angela, sweetheart," he smiled, his voice raspy but warm. "Hi, Dad," I whispered, stepping into the cramped room. The stark contrast between the multi-million-dollar mansion I had just left and this depressing, cramped space hit me like a physical blow. For 2 decades, my father had been forced to live in this low-tier facility, eating tasteless food and staring at a brick wall. And it was all because of Robert. I sat on the edge of my father's narrow bed and took his frail hand in mine. His skin was paper-thin, but his grip was steady. Looking at his kind face, a profound wave of sorrow and absolute clarity washed over me. I had finally done it. The paperwork was signed, and the proxy was legally revoked. I glanced at the clock on the peeling wall. It was exactly 6:30 in the evening. "We are going home." As I helped my father fold his few sweaters into a small suitcase, the memories I had suppressed for so long began to surface. People often ask why a highly educated, capable woman would stay in a deeply abusive, one-sided marriage for 20 years. Why didn't I just pack my bags and walk out the moment Robert started treating me like a disposable servant? The answer was standing right in front of me. 9 years ago, on a freezing, rainy November night, my father suffered a severe stroke. The medical bills piled up instantly, threatening to bankrupt us. At the time, Robert's tech company had just gone public, bringing in millions. When I begged him for a loan to transfer my father to a proper rehabilitation center, Robert had looked at me with cold, calculating eyes. "I will pay for a basic facility," Robert had said, his tone dripping with ownership. "But in exchange, you will drop your career aspirations and manage my clinical trial protocols full-time. If you leave me, I cut the funding for your father. It is a simple transaction." He didn't want a wife. He wanted a highly qualified, indentured clinician who wouldn't demand a salary. He weaponized my father's life. Robert slowly and systematically conditioned me to believe that I was entirely trapped. In psychology, it is called learned helplessness. When a person is repeatedly subjected to an inescapable, painful situation, they eventually stop trying to avoid it, even when a clear opportunity for escape presents itself. Robert manipulated me into believing that my worth was strictly tied to keeping him alive. He planted the toxic seed that if I ever stopped monitoring his heart rate, if I ever stopped fighting with insurance brokers on his behalf, he would die, and my father would be thrown out onto the street. He made me feel that asserting my own boundaries would make me a murderer. I became the perfect silent guard dog chained to his illness. I meticulously managed his complex autoimmune disease while my own soul withered away. Every time he paraded his wealth while my father ate cold oatmeal, I swallowed the rage. I let the frustration compress into a cold, hard diamond of patience. But Robert made one fatal miscalculation. He grew too arrogant. He became so blinded by his own vanity and his new young mistress that he willingly signed the divorce papers, eager to erase me from his glamorous life. He handed me the key to my own chains. I zipped my father's suitcase shut. The heavy metallic sound echoed in the small room. The chains were completely broken. Nursing my son is your duty as a wife and a healthcare professional. Patricia, my former mother-in-law, used to tell me. She would sit in my living room sipping Earl Grey tea from my fine china while I rushed between the kitchen and Robert's medical equipment. Patricia never once said thank you, neither did his sister Melissa. Whenever I asked Melissa to sit with Robert for just one evening so I could visit my father at the nursing home, she would roll her eyes. "I have a life, Angela," she would snap. "You are the one with the clinical background. Just figure it out." They completely bought into Robert's illusion. They believed the only reason Robert could live a normal, highly successful life despite a severe autoimmune disease was simply because he was a genetically superior, exceptional man. They viewed my exhaustive labor as a basic, expected service. I was not a family member to them. I was merely the hired help they didn't have to pay. For years, I justified their cruelty. I told myself they were just terrified of losing him. I convinced myself that keeping the family intact was worth the daily disrespect. But the moment that justification completely shattered came exactly 6 months ago. Robert had complained of severe dizziness and a terrifying tightness in his chest. I drove him to the emergency room in the middle of a torrential downpour at 2 a.m. I sat by his side on a hard plastic chair through a grueling 4-hour IV drip, monitoring his vitals and consulting with the tired ER doctors. By 6 a.m, we were finally driving back to Beacon Hill. I was entirely exhausted, my scrubs wrinkled, my eyes burning from lack of sleep. Robert was lounging in the passenger seat, casually scrolling through his phone. Suddenly, the screen lit up with a call. He answered it immediately. His voice, which had been weak and groaning just hours before, suddenly became bright, upbeat, and incredibly charming. "Oh, I just had a minor dizzy spell," Robert laughed smoothly into the phone. "I am a strong guy. I would never let a little fatigue beat me. Yes, let us go to that French bistro you wanted to try this weekend." He was talking to Jessica. He did not show an ounce of concern for me. After he hung up, he didn't offer a single word of gratitude to the woman who had stayed awake all night, keeping his heart beating the woman currently, driving him safely home in the pouring rain. He just leaned back and closed his eyes with a satisfied smile. In that exact moment, sitting behind the steering wheel, something inside my chest quietly and completely crumbled into dust. This man did not see me as his wife. He did not even see me as a human being who felt pain, exhaustion, or fear. He only viewed me as a convenient, invisible machine designed to keep him alive so he could entertain other women. My love didn't end with a screaming match. It didn't end with broken dishes or dramatic tears. It ended in the absolute freezing silence of that car ride. By the time I parked in our driveway, the marriage was already over in my mind. It was already dead. At 8 o'clock the next morning, the heavy glass doors of my primary bank branch slid open. The city was just waking up, but my mind was already operating at maximum analytical capacity. I walked directly to the desk of the senior branch manager. Robert was a wealthy man. As the director of technology at a massive firm, his salary was astronomical. He wore tailored suits, drove imported cars, and loved to flaunt his financial superiority. But like most arrogant men, he was entirely clueless about the actual mechanics of his own household. He genuinely believed his premium corporate health insurance covered everything. He used to brag to his friends, "My company's health plan is top tier. My medical bills are basically nothing. He had absolutely no idea that his specific experimental autoimmune suppressants were routinely denied by standard insurance. He didn't know that the only reason his out-of-pocket costs were so low was because I spent hundreds of hours navigating a complex maze of federal grants, clinical trial subsidies, and the compassionate use program. That program alone required a licensed clinical caregiver me to submit exhaustive monthly evaluations to maintain the funding. Without my administrative shield, the retail cost of his specialty infusions was $9,500 a month. "Good morning, Angela. How can I help you today?" the manager asked politely. "I need to separate all joint accounts and reroute my direct deposits," I instructed evenly. "I also need to immediately cancel the auto-draft authorizations for the medical billing department at the Immunology Research Institute, the specialty pharmacy, and the Beacon Hill utility accounts." The manager typed quietly on her keyboard. When she saw the sheer volume of money that was automatically deducted every month just to keep Robert alive and comfortable, her eyes widened in shock. "Are you sure you want to cancel these, Angela? The medical auto drafts are quite substantial. If these fail to process, the clinic will immediately suspend his specialty fulfillment. I am entirely sure. My ex-husband will be managing his own finances from now on." I watched as the banker systematically deleted the routing numbers. For 20 years, I had quietly subsidized his luxurious lifestyle by neutralizing his catastrophic medical debts behind his back. I had run myself ragged between insurance brokers and hospital billing departments just to protect his fragile ego. I did all of that while he told his mistress that I was a burden. "The transfers are complete," the manager said, handing me my new individual debit card. "Would you like me to destroy the old joint checks?" "Yes, please." I watched the old checkbook slide into the industrial shredder. The sound of tearing paper echoed in the quiet bank. Robert would soon receive the automated billing failure notices. He would have to face the terrifying, unfiltered reality of his own bank statements. He would finally understand that the financial wealth he believed was undeniable proof of his own success was merely a fragile illusion built entirely upon my unpaid labor. I slipped the new card into my purse and walked out into the crisp morning air. The vault was closed. The new apartment was small, but it was flooded with brilliant, warm sunlight. It was located in a quiet, leafy neighborhood far away from the sterile, cold luxury of Beacon Hill. When I unlocked the front door and guided my father inside, my daughter Hannah was already waiting for us. Grandpa Hannah smiled brightly, taking Walter's frail arm and leading him to a plush, comfortable armchair by the large living room window. For the first time in 2 decades, my father was not staring at a peeling brick wall in a rundown facility. He was sitting in a space that smelled of fresh linen and the hot chamomile tea Hannah had just brewed. The gentle sunlight washed over his face, and he let out a long, peaceful sigh. Looking at him, the heavy, suffocating knot that had lived in my chest for 20 years finally dissolved. Robert had used this gentle old man as a hostage. He had weaponized my love for my father, forcing me into a corner where I had to choose between my father's survival and my own freedom. But now Robert had no leverage left. The hostage was safe. I sat across from my father and wrapped both my hands around a warm mug of tea. The gentle heat transferred to my freezing fingertips. I tried to remember the last time I had sat down in the middle of the day just to drink tea. For 20 years, my entire concept of time had revolved exclusively around Robert's survival. Hannah sat beside me and gently touched my arm. "Mom, you look like you can finally breathe." I nodded slowly, offering her a small, genuine smile. "I can." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the clock application. Listed on the bright screen were over 15 meticulously scheduled alarms: morning, noon, evening, and the middle of the night. 6:00 a.m. Blood pressure check. 7:30 a.m. Low sodium breakfast prep. 1:100 a.m. Hydration and tremor observation. 2:15 p.m. Immunosuppressant dose 1. 3:00 a.m. Respiratory monitoring. Every single alarm was a heavy iron chain binding me to a man who despised me. They were the traumatic soundtrack of my daily existence, constantly demanding that I sacrifice my own peace to neutralize his medical crises before they even happened. With a steady thumb, I began to swipe left on the screen. Delete, delete, delete. With every alarm that vanished, a crushing weight lifted from my shoulders. I didn't have to jolt awake in terror at the sound of irregular breathing. I didn't have to strain my ears listening for a phantom medical emergency. I had completely forgotten how incredibly luxurious and comforting pure, uninterrupted silence could be. When I finished deleting the very last one, the screen simply read, "No alarms set." I placed the phone face down on the coffee table. Outside the window, a small bird chirped in the trees. The apartment was entirely peaceful. Nobody was going to angrily demand their medication. Nobody was going to complain that the food was too bland. I was finally breathing. At that exact moment across the city, in the affluent bubble of Beacon Hill, Robert was waking up in a foul mood. The digital clock on the mahogany nightstand read 10:00 a.m. Usually by this hour, a mathematically calculated zero-sodium breakfast would be waiting for him in the dining room, alongside a precisely separated dosage of his morning specialty pills. But when Robert walked into his massive, imported marble kitchen, the counters were completely bare. "Jessica, is breakfast not ready?" Robert called out toward the master bedroom irritation, lacing his booming voice. A muffled groan replied from under the expensive silk sheets. "It's my day off from content creation. Let me sleep, Robert. Order something." Robert aggressively clicked his tongue. He opened the refrigerator, finding only expensive champagne and leftover takeout that was loaded with lethal amounts of sodium. He settled for pouring a glass of cold tap water. As he reached for the glass, he froze. The hand holding the crystal tumbler was trembling. It wasn't a violent shake, just a subtle, persistent vibration in his right fingertips. Along with the tremor, a disgusting, clammy sweat coated his palms. "It's just a minor side effect of a bad night's sleep," Robert forced himself to believe. "Just missing one day of my strict routine cannot possibly ruin my health this quickly. Angela was always just exaggerating everything to make herself look important." He walked over to the mountain of pharmacy bottles I had left on the kitchen island. Without my dollar store plastic organizer separating the exact dosages, the bottles looked like a chaotic, confusing puzzle. He grabbed the largest bottle, popped the childproof cap, and swallowed 2 pills with the cold water. He had absolutely no idea if it was the correct medication for his morning cycle, or if he was supposed to take it on an empty stomach. Munching on a piece of stale toast, Robert began preparing for his afternoon clinical evaluation at the Immunology Research Institute. He pulled his favorite custom-tailored designer jacket from his expansive closet and adjusted his posture in the full-length mirror. He stared at his reflection, supported entirely by the arrogant belief that he was an untouchable, vibrant executive. He commanded respect in boardrooms, therefore he believed his body must also obey his commands. He looked every bit the reliable, affluent older man that Jessica loved to show off on her social media. "Hey, Jessica, get up," Robert called out, slipping on his expensive leather watch. "We are going to the clinic this afternoon. It will just be a quick 5-minute chat with Dr. Cameron, and then I'll buy you that designer bag you wanted." Jessica finally sat up, stretching her arms and pouting. Hospitals are so depressing. "Fine, but we are going to a nice steakhouse after." "Of course we are," Robert smirked, feeling entirely victorious. He had kicked out his nagging, boring wife. He had secured a beautiful young partner. He fully expected today's clinic visit to be a breeze. He had absolutely no idea that his perfectly tailored suit would do nothing to shield him from the brutal, unforgiving machinery of the medical system. The countdown had begun. Before heading to the clinic, Jessica insisted on stopping at the specialty pharmacy near the hospital. Robert, feeling a sudden heavy fatigue in his legs, had decided to wait in the idling luxury car while Jessica went inside. She walked into the sterile pharmacy wearing her bright floral sundress, carrying a massive designer handbag and holding Robert's empty prescription bottle. She approached the counter with a breezy, casual attitude, expecting to simply hand over the bottle and walk out with a refill in 2 minutes. Standing behind the counter was Joanne, the veteran head pharmacist. Joanne was one of the very few people who truly understood the lethal complexity of Robert's drug regimen. For 2 decades, I was always the first person through those pharmacy doors accurately explaining Robert's midnight palpitations and updating Joanne on Dr. Cameron's slightest dosage adjustments. "Hi, I'm here to pick up Robert's refills," Jessica smiled, sliding the empty bottle across the counter. "I'm his new partner. I'll be handling all of this boring stuff from now on." Joanne picked up the bottle, her professional gaze sweeping over Jessica. She typed Robert's name into the system. Almost immediately, a bright red warning banner flashed across Joanne's monitor. "Miss, this prescription requires clinical authorization," Joanne stated, her voice tight with concern. "There was a critical dosage change last week due to elevated liver enzymes. Where is his clinical logbook? I need to verify his post-medication reactions before I can release the new suppressants." Jessica rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed by the delay. "Oh my God, it's not that serious. He is practically cured. Just give me the pills. He told me these are basically just like heavy-duty vitamin supplements." Joanne stopped typing. The air in the pharmacy seemed to instantly freeze. "Vitamin supplements," Joanne repeated, her voice leaking clear professional dread. "Miss, these are heavily regulated high-toxicity immunosuppressants. If he takes the wrong dosage or if he mixes them with high-sodium foods, it could trigger a fatal cardiovascular event. This is incredibly dangerous. Does he not have his clinical caregiver with him?" "Look, I don't know anything about liver whatever," Jessica snapped, her glamorous facade cracking into genuine irritation. "His ex-wife used to do all this dramatic charting, but she's gone now. I'm not a nurse. I just need the vitamins so we can go to lunch." A freezing wind blew through Joanne's chest. She looked at the young, clueless woman standing in front of her. Jessica had blindly swallowed every lie Robert had told her. Robert had completely hidden the severity of his incurable disease, just to look like a strong, attractive man. Joanne realized with sheer terror that Robert was currently out there in the world, unmonitored, ingesting highly toxic chemicals without the slightest understanding of what they did to his body. Without Angela's meticulous records, Robert wasn't just a patient missing a refill. He was a critical medical emergency waiting to happen. "I cannot dispense this medication to you," Joanne said, firmly pulling the bottle back. "Not without the licensed Proxy's signature." Jessica huffed, spun on her designer heels, and stormed out of the pharmacy. He was completely exposed. My smartphone vibrated on the small kitchen table of my new apartment. I had just finished arranging a vase of fresh flowers near the window. I glanced at the caller ID. It was the direct line from the specialty pharmacy located across the street from the Immunology Research Institute. I picked it up on the second ring. "Hello, this is Angela." "Angela, thank God." A voice exhaled heavily. It was Joanne, the veteran head pharmacist. She sounded incredibly shaken, her professional composure entirely fractured. "I am so sorry to bother you on your day off. I just had the most terrifying interaction at the counter." A young woman named Jessica came in, claiming she was picking up Robert's new suppressants. I kept my voice perfectly level. "Yes, she is his new partner. She will be handling his errands moving forward." Joanne paused, clearly thrown by my calm tone. "Angela, she didn't bring the clinical logbook. She didn't even know what the medication was. She called a highly toxic Tier 4 immunosuppressant a vitamin supplement." When I tried to explain the severe dietary restrictions required for the new dosage, she rolled her eyes and told me I was overreacting. I listened quietly, tracing the edge of my teacup with my finger. It was exactly as I had predicted. "I refuse to dispense the medication," Joanne continued, her voice leaking genuine dread. "Given Robert's current liver enzyme panels, letting someone with zero clinical understanding manage his regimen is a death sentence. Angela, you know how volatile his condition is. Why wasn't she briefed?" "Joanne," I said, my tone remaining steady and entirely detached. "Robert and I finalized our divorce yesterday afternoon. I am no longer his wife." I heard a sharp gasp over the line. A heavy, stunned silence filled the space between us. "Yesterday, I officially instructed the medical board to remove me as his clinical proxy and emergency contact." I continued stating the facts like I was reading a policy manual. I surrendered all legal authorization to his medical files. "From this moment forward, please direct all medication counseling side effect warnings and legal liability waivers directly to him and his new partner." Joanne could not speak for a long moment. She was one of the very few people who had a front row seat to the 20 years of grueling, meticulous labor I had endured to keep Robert alive. She knew that I used to stay awake for 3 days straight just to monitor his blood concentration levels. I see Joanne finally squeezed the words out. Her voice sounded thick with sudden realization. "Angela, considering how flawlessly you maintain those records, Robert truly has no idea what was protecting him all this time. Does he? He believes his sheer willpower and his bank account keep him healthy," I replied simply. I understand completely, Joanne said, her tone shifting back to strict medical professionalism. I will delete your contact information from his clinical file immediately. Angela, you have worked so hard for so long. Please get some rest. It was the exact same phrase Jessica had used yesterday, but this time it was not an insult. It was a sincere acknowledgement from a medical expert. Thank you, Joanne, I said and calmly ended the call. While I was enjoying the quiet morning sun in my new living room, Robert was sitting in the back of his chauffeured town car, staring at his smartphone in absolute disbelief. An automated email from the specialty pharmacy had just populated his inbox. Because Joanne had locked his prescription profile due to missing clinical oversight, the automated billing system had triggered a full financial review. The system instantly recognized that his compassionate use subsidy lacked a registered clinical caregiver. The notification was entirely heartless, written in standard administrative formatting. Your clinical grant has been suspended. Please update your primary payment method. Your out-of-pocket responsibility for a 30-day supply of specialty medication is $9,500. Robert blinked his eyes, scanning the numbers again. $9,500 every single month. For 20 years, thanks to my relentless paperwork submissions, his copay at the pharmacy counter had never exceeded $40. He scoffed loudly, tossing the phone onto the leather seat. Ridiculous, he muttered to Jessica, who was busy taking a selfie next to him. The hospital's billing software is glitching again. It's always so incompetent. I will just have the VIP concierge desk fix it when we get there. He genuinely believed his wealth and status made him immune to the rigid rules of the American healthcare system. He thought the low medical bills he had enjoyed for 2 decades were simply a perk of being an elite executive. He had completely erased the memory of me dragging my exhausted body straight from a night shift to wait in endless lines at the insurance broker's office. At 1:30 in the afternoon, Robert and Jessica strode into the massive echoing lobby of the Immunology Research Institute. Robert walked up to the automated check-in kiosk brimming with arrogant confidence and scanned his barcode. The screen instantly flashed a bright, aggressive red error message. Insurance verification failed. Clinical grant suspended. Please proceed to the main billing desk. Robert clicked his tongue in extreme annoyance. He grabbed Jessica's hand and marched over to the front desk, bypassing the line. My barcode is not working, Robert demanded, tapping his fingers impatiently on the counter. Just process my check-in. I have a 1:45 appointment with Dr. Cameron. You know who I am. The billing clerk did not flinch. She typed his name into her terminal, her expression entirely neutral. Mr. Robert, the system shows that your compassionate use authorization expired at midnight. We cannot verify your new clinical proxy, and we do not have the original grant card on file. I do not carry that paperwork, Robert snapped, his face flushing red. My ex-wife used to handle that trivial stuff. Just push it through. I apologize, sir, the clerk stated in a robotic, manual-driven voice. But without an active grant, your account defaults to standard self-pay rates. We require a deposit of $9,500 before you can proceed to the clinical floor. Robert stood entirely frozen. The cold mechanical reality of the hospital system had just slammed directly into his ego. Are you telling me I cannot see my own doctor unless I pay 10 grand right now? Robert raised his voice, drawing the stares of other patients in the lobby. It is a strict federal policy for experimental treatments, sir. We cannot make exceptions, the clerk replied, her voice completely devoid of empathy. You may wait in the overflow seating area while you contact your financial institution. Humiliated and furious, Robert was forced to step away from the desk. He pulled out his platinum credit card, authorizing the massive charge just to clear the screen. His hand was shaking so badly he dropped the card twice. The subtle tremors from the morning had evolved into a noticeable, uncontrollable vibration in his right arm. He practically dragged Jessica to the waiting area outside the clinical exam rooms. He dropped heavily onto the hard plastic bench. Why is this taking so long? Jessica complained, crossing her arms and pouting. You said this would be a quick 5-minute chat. My spa appointment is in an hour. Her complaints grated violently against Robert's nerves. Just be patient. Big hospitals are always like this, he snapped back in a low, breathless voice. But his tone lacked its usual dominance, perhaps because he had taken the wrong dosage of his morning pills, or perhaps because the sheer stress was triggering an autoimmune flare-up. His breathing was becoming noticeably shallow. The clammy sweat on his palms had soaked his expensive trousers. Until today, Robert had almost never experienced wait times at the hospital. He had no idea that I used to spend hours researching the clinic's peak traffic patterns, booking his appointments during the absolute quietest windows. While he sat on comfortable lobby sofas, I was the one standing at the desk, arguing with receptionists, verifying insurance codes, and smoothing out every single administrative wrinkle before he even walked through the doors. He believed his appointments were fast simply because he was important. Now, with that invisible breakwater completely gone, he was taking the freezing, chaotic waves of reality directly to the face. 45 minutes passed. Robert's chest felt incredibly tight. Every time he inhaled, a sickening wheeze echoed deep in his throat. He looked around the waiting room. He saw a wife adjusting her husband's oxygen mask. He saw a daughter carefully organizing a thick folder of medical documents for her elderly father. Everywhere he looked, he saw patients desperately clinging to life with the physical support of someone who loved them. Robert realized he had absolutely no one. The young woman sitting next to him was busy scrolling through social media, utterly oblivious to the fact that his heart was hammering against his ribs in an irregular, terrifying rhythm. He was entirely exposed. If you've ever watched an arrogant person walk straight into a trap they built themselves, hit the like button and let me know. While Robert was suffocating under the weight of his own hubris in that waiting room, I was sitting in a quiet cafe reviewing a stack of independent insurance claims for my new consulting firm. I took a sip of my black tea, feeling an overwhelming sense of intellectual peace. People often misunderstand how the American healthcare system actually works. They believe that doctors and hospitals make decisions based on emotion, compassion, or personal relationships. But as an insurance appraiser, I know the absolute truth. The system does not possess a heart. It operates entirely on risk assessment, liability formulas, and verified documentation. When a patient is enrolled in a Tier 1 clinical trial for a volatile autoimmune disease, the hospital assumes a massive legal liability. If that patient takes the wrong dosage and dies in their facility, the hospital faces multi-million-dollar lawsuits. To mitigate that risk, the system mandates a clinical caregiver protocol. It requires a licensed proxy to be present to monitor the patient 24 hours a day, and to sign binding legal waivers, assuming responsibility for the patient's daily compliance. For 20 years, my signature was the only thing standing between Robert and the legal department's rejection stamp. When I filed the revocation of medical proxy that morning, I did not just remove my name from a piece of paper. I executed a precise, calculated administrative strike. I essentially notified a multi-billion-dollar medical institution that patient Robert was now a rogue, unmonitored variable. The system did not hate Robert. The system did not know he was a cruel husband or a narcissist. The system simply looked at the data, an experimental drug, a high-risk disease, and a missing caregiver signature. The algorithm automatically calculated that Robert's risk of sudden death had skyrocketed to an unacceptable level. Therefore, the system automatically triggered the suspension of his grants and flagged his file for immediate institutional review. I didn't have to hire a lawyer to destroy him. I didn't have to scream at his new mistress or beg his family for an apology. I simply stepped out of the way and allowed the merciless cold machinery of reality to process him according to its rules. True justice isn't loud. True justice is the quiet, undeniable authority of data. It is the realization that you cannot manipulate an algorithm with a custom-tailored suit or a charming smile. The paperwork does not lie, and the paperwork does not forget. Right at this exact moment, I knew the waiting room speakers were about to call his name. The trap I had perfectly, legally, and silently assembled was finally springing shut. Robert, please proceed to exam room 3. The automated voice echoing from the overhead speaker sounded like a judge reading a final verdict. Robert tried to stand up from the hard plastic bench, but for a terrifying second his knees completely buckled. He had to grip the handrail tightly, his knuckles turning white, just to support his own body weight. He was desperate to hide his physical weakness from Jessica. "Let's go!" He forced a tight fake smile. He pushed open the heavy oak door to exam room 3. The noisy chatter of the waiting room was instantly shut out, replaced by the faint, sterile smell of clinical antiseptic. The cold air from the ventilation system brushed against Robert's flushed, sweating cheeks. Usually, this was a highly choreographed routine. I would walk into the room first, shake the doctor's hand, and provide a perfectly summarized update of the last 30 days. Robert would follow behind me with a leisurely stride, sitting quietly with his arms crossed while I handled the complex medical dialogue. The atmosphere was always calm, controlled, and deeply respectful. But today, the room felt like an interrogation chamber. Sitting behind the sleek metal desk was Dr. Cameron. He was a strict, brilliant immunologist who only cared about empirical data and hard facts. He did not immediately look up when Robert and Jessica entered. His sharp gaze was locked onto his electronic medical monitor. And sitting dead center on the desk, placed perfectly under the bright fluorescent light like a terrifying piece of forensic evidence, was the thick blue clinical trial protocol binder I had deliberately left behind on our coffee table yesterday. "Good afternoon," Dr. Robert boomed, forcing a loud, overly confident voice as he dropped heavily into the plastic guest chair. Jessica sat next to him, giving a casual little wave. "Hi there. I will be accompanying him from now on. His ex-wife is gone, so I am his new support system." Robert touched Jessica's shoulder with a satisfied smirk, desperately trying to project the image of a wealthy, successful man who had just upgraded his life. "She is young, but she is very capable. You don't need to worry about a thing, Doc. Just write me my usual prescriptions. I feel a little heavy today, but it is probably just fatigue from my busy schedule." Dr. Cameron's expression did not shift a single millimeter. He slowly raised his head, directing a freezing, absolute stare right at Robert. There were no words of congratulations on his new relationship. There was no polite small talk. "I see," Dr. Cameron said. His voice was highly administrative, detached, and icy. "Then let us get straight to the facts. We are about to see the exact moment a narcissist's illusion shatters. If you're ready for Dr. Cameron's verdict, keep listening." Sitting behind his immaculate metal desk, Dr. Cameron did not offer a polite greeting. He did not ask Robert about his weekend or his new sports car. The renowned immunologist simply adjusted his glasses and stared directly at the arrogant man sitting across from him. "What exact time did you take your morning immunosuppressants, Robert?" Dr. Cameron asked, his voice as sharp and clinical as a scalpel. Robert shifted uncomfortably in the plastic guest chair, attempting to maintain his facade of casual dominance. "Well, there was a minor mix-up with the pharmacy this morning. The billing system had a glitch, so I could not pick up the new batch. I just took whatever was left in the old bottles. Missing one strict dose is not a big deal, right?" The rhythmic sound of Dr. Cameron typing on his keyboard instantly stopped. He let out a deep, heavy exhale and turned his ice-cold eyes entirely onto Robert. "Mr. Robert, the experimental medications you are taking are critically essential Tier 4 suppressants," the doctor stated, his voice laced with a quiet, undeniable fury. "I prescribed them down to the exact microgram. They are meticulously timed to maintain a constant life-saving concentration in your bloodstream. To interrupt or alter that regimen based on your own amateur, uneducated judgment is absolutely inexcusable. Have you completely forgotten the fatal risks associated with this trial?" Jessica, sitting next to Robert in her bright floral sundress, looked back and forth between the two men. Her eyes widened in genuine shock. "Doctor, you are exaggerating," Robert bluffed, his face flushing red. "I have lived with this minor condition for years, and I am perfectly fine. I have a demanding corporate job. I am a strong man." Dr. Cameron did not argue. Instead, he quietly reached out and pulled the thick blue clinical trial protocol binder toward him. He slowly flipped open the heavy cover. "Let me ask you a very specific question," Dr. Cameron said softly. "After taking the new post-dinner medication I prescribed last week, what exactly happened to the tremors in your right hand?" Robert furrowed his brows, looking genuinely confused. "Tremors in my right hand. I never had any tremors to begin with. My hands are perfectly steady." He firmly believed he had absolute control and awareness of his own physical body, but Dr. Cameron simply tapped a specific highlighted page in the binder. "It is recorded right here in Angela's clinical handwriting." The doctor read the small print aloud, his voice echoing in the silent room. 30 minutes after dinner, slight tremors observed in the fingertips of the right hand. Subsided after 30 seconds, but has occurred for 3 consecutive days. Patient is completely unaware. Robert was rendered entirely speechless. He had not noticed those tiny, terrifying neurological changes himself at all. I had been continuously observing his every single movement, catching the microscopic signs of failure while he was simply watching television or eating dinner. How about the midnight palpitations? Dr. Cameron's interrogation did not stop. 3 nights ago, you woke up slightly short of breath. 2:15 in the morning. Respiration, shallow, cold sweat on forehead. Subsided after 5 minutes of back rubbing and a precise dose of rescue inhaler. This is also heavily documented. A drop of cold sweat slid down Robert's spine. The symptoms he had dismissed as mere fatigue from a long day at the office were actual lethal warnings. The only reason he believed he was a healthy, strong executive was because I was constantly racing ahead of him, crushing the seeds of a fatal medical crisis before they could ever bloom. He was absolutely terrified. Jessica shifted violently in the guest chair, pulling her designer handbag tightly against her chest. The glamorous, affluent lifestyle she thought she was marrying into was rapidly disintegrating right in front of her eyes. "Robert, you never told me you had severe symptoms like that." Jessica's voice completely lacked the breezy, arrogant tone she had used at my dining room table yesterday. "You told me taking these pills was basically just like taking daily vitamin supplements." Robert could not look Jessica in the eye. Angela is just exaggerating things in her notes to make herself look important. He desperately piled on excuses trying to patch the massive holes in his ego. "I am the director of technology. I am a strong man." Dr. Cameron closed the blue binder. The heavy thud of the cover sounded like a judge's gavel striking the bench. "You have never fought this illness yourself, Robert." Dr. Cameron stated, delivering the ultimate psychological blow. "The one fighting this intractable disease was your ex-wife. You simply existed inside a sterile, perfectly calibrated incubator that she built for you, mistaking yourself for someone strong." Robert opened his mouth to argue, but the doctor raised a hand to silence him. "Because Angela officially revoked her clinical proxy and liability waivers this morning, the hospital administration has automatically flagged your file," Dr. Cameron explained, shifting to the cold, undeniable rules of the system. "Without a licensed caregiver to monitor you 24 hours a day, hospital protocol strictly forbids outpatient treatment for your specific disease stage. You are an extreme liability." Robert's vision went completely black. "Then what am I supposed to do? Give me the pills." "I cannot dispense them for home use," the doctor replied without a shred of sympathy. "You must be admitted to an inpatient facility. However, our research beds are strictly reserved for acute surgical patients. You will have to find a transfer hospital or enter a specialized, highly monitored skilled nursing facility immediately." Skilled nursing facility. The word struck Robert's skull like a sledgehammer. Just 24 hours ago, he believed he was embarking on an exciting, luxurious new life, celebrating his ultimate freedom from his nagging wife. Now the system was ordering him to be institutionalized. Dr. Cameron turned his sharp gaze to Jessica. "Miss, if you intend to sign on as his new clinical proxy, you must pass a medical competency exam and assume full legal liability for his sudden cardiac events. Are you prepared to do so?" Jessica stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the linoleum floor. The fantasy of private jets and fancy dinners had vanished, replaced by the gritty, horrifying reality of adult diapers, midnight hospital runs, and legal liability. "I am not a registered nurse." Jessica squeezed out her voice, shaking with panic. "I am an influencer. I didn't sign up for this." "Jessica, sit down!" Robert yelled, his arrogant mask shattering completely. But she did not listen. Without looking back, Jessica pushed open the heavy oak door and practically sprinted down the hallway. He was utterly alone. The desperate retaliation came exactly 3 days later. I was sitting at the sleek wooden desk of my newly rented office space, reviewing the architectural plans for my independent consulting firm. The afternoon sun poured through the large glass windows. My phone suddenly buzzed with a furious, unhinged voicemail from Robert's sister, Melissa. "Angela, you are a monster," Melissa screamed through the audio recording. "Robert is bankrupting himself, paying self-pay rates at the clinic. He is incredibly sick. We hired a top-tier corporate litigation firm. We are going to sue you for everything you have for criminally abandoning a vulnerable patient. You better prepare yourself." 10 minutes later, a formal email arrived in my inbox from a prestigious Boston law firm. The subject line read, "Notice of intent to litigate, criminal endangerment and caregiver abandonment." The email was packed with aggressive legal jargon threatening to drag me into federal court, strip my professional licenses, and force me to pay millions in medical restitution. This was their grand, terrifying counterattack. A normal person would have panicked. A normal person would have called a lawyer in tears, terrified of the wealthy family's wrath. I did not panic. I simply took a calm sip of my chamomile tea. I had anticipated this exact maneuver for months. I opened a secure folder on my laptop and attached a single, highly specific PDF document to my reply email. It was the expedited, uncontested divorce settlement. When Robert had demanded the divorce, he was entirely blinded by his lust for Jessica and his desire to publicly parade her around his social circles. He wanted the marriage dissolved immediately. To speed up the mandatory waiting periods, his own lawyers had drafted a sweeping, unconditional severing of all ties. I opened the document and highlighted Section 4, Full Medical, Financial, and Civil Liability Waiver. By signing that page, Robert legally declared himself a fully capable, independent adult, explicitly releasing his spouse from any and all future clinical obligations, duty of care, and financial support. I attached the highlighted PDF to the email. Below it, I pasted the direct text of the Federal Caregiver Voluntary Act, which clearly states that unpaid family caregivers cannot be legally compelled to provide medical services after the dissolution of a legal union provided a proxy. Revocation is properly filed. I typed a single sentence to the aggressive corporate lawyer. Please review the attached documents, specifically the liability waiver your client eagerly signed and notarized last Thursday. Proceeding with this baseless litigation will result in immediate countersuits for malicious prosecution. I clicked send. I set my phone down and went back to reviewing my office floor plans. Exactly 22 minutes later, my inbox chimed with a reply from the prestigious law firm. It was incredibly brief. Miss Angela, we have reviewed the attached documents. Please be advised that our firm is formally withdrawing our representation of Mr. Robert in this matter. We consider this file closed. The threat vanished instantly. The total collapse of Robert's glamorous empire was shockingly fast-moving, with the cold, linear efficiency of a mathematical equation. Without my administrative shield protecting his bank accounts, and without my clinical vigilance neutralizing his physical symptoms, reality crashed down upon him. Just 1 week after Jessica abandoned him in the clinic, Robert suffered a severe autoimmune crash in his empty mansion. Because he had no authorized proxy to navigate the elite research hospital's intake protocols, the paramedics were legally forced to transport him to the nearest available public trauma center. He spent 3 agonizing nights in a crowded, noisy, underfunded intensive care unit. When he was finally stabilized, the hospital billing administrator handed him a preliminary invoice for $32,000. That was just for the emergency stabilization. His accounts, already bleeding from the retail cost of his medications, were rapidly draining. To cover his massive medical debts, the bank foreclosed on the luxurious Beacon Hill mansion. He lost his custom-tailored suits, his imported cars, and the arrogant vanity that had defined his entire existence. Deemed a high-risk patient with absolutely zero family support or financial assets, the state intervened. Robert was transferred to a government-funded low-tier facility. By a twist of pure bureaucratic irony, he was placed in the exact same facility where he had forced my father to live for years, Valley View Care Center. He was left to stare at the same peeling wallpaper, eating the same cold oatmeal, entirely stripped of his power. Meanwhile, I stood in the lobby of my brand-new office. The polished brass sign on the glass door read Aegis Patient Advocacy and Insurance Consulting. I had officially launched my independent firm, using the 2 decades of grueling, specialized knowledge I acquired while keeping Robert alive. I now worked to protect vulnerable, marginalized families from being crushed by the ruthless American healthcare system. I helped elderly patients secure funding. I helped desperate mothers navigate complex clinical trial paperwork. I was no longer a silent, unappreciated servant in a toxic marriage. I was a respected professional, using my trauma to build an absolute fortress for others. After my first successful week in business, I drove back to our cozy, sunlit apartment. I opened the door and heard the gentle, comforting sound of laughter. My daughter Hannah was sitting at the dining table playing a game of chess with my father Walter. My father looked healthier than he had in years. The color had returned to his cheeks, and he was smiling warmly as he moved his knight across the board. Hannah poured him another cup of tea, her eyes shining with pure joy. I leaned against the doorframe watching them. The suffocating weight of my past was entirely gone. The scales were finally balanced. It was a quiet Sunday morning. I was standing on my apartment balcony watering the small, vibrant peperomia plant Hannah and I had bought on our first day of freedom. The city below was peaceful. Suddenly, my smartphone vibrated on the patio table. The screen displayed an unknown restricted local number. I took a slow, calm breath and answered. "Hello. Angela, please." The voice on the other end was raspy, broken, and completely devoid of arrogance. It was Robert. Calling from the public phone at the Valley View Care Center, he sounded like a pathetic, terrified stranger. "Angela, I am so sorry," Robert wept, his voice cracking into a heavy sob. "They don't know how to manage my diet here. The nurses don't check on me. I am so sick, Angela. I was wrong about everything. You were the only one who actually cared. Please just come visit me. I am nothing without you." Hearing his desperate pleas, I felt no anger. I felt no triumphant, vengeful joy. I simply felt the profound, quiet relief of a woman who had finally finished a grueling 20-year shift. "I never abandoned you to your illness, Robert," I said, my voice perfectly level and hauntingly calm. "For 2 decades, I sacrificed my own soul to ensure you survived, but you abandoned me as your wife a very long time ago. You chose your ego. You chose your vanity." "I was stupid. I'll do anything," he begged. "If you need medical support, you must consult your assigned facility social worker," I replied, delivering my absolute final goodbye. "I will no longer include my life in your treatment plan. Take responsibility for your own life, Robert." I hung up the phone. I pressed the block button, permanently sealing the heavy iron door on my past. I turned away from the city skyline and looked back inside my apartment. Walter was laughing at a joke Hannah had made. The sunlight caught the edges of their smiling faces. This beautiful, mundane, utterly normal life was the ultimate prize I had fought so hard to reclaim. People often think that revenge must be loud. They believe it requires screaming, destroying property, or actively ruining someone's life. But when you are dealing with a person who uses your love as a limitless resource, the most devastating retaliation is simply withdrawing your grace. You let the world treat them exactly the way they deserve to be treated. To anyone out there who is currently grinding their own soul into dust to keep a toxic relationship alive, your kindness is not a weakness, but it is not an infinite supply either. You do not owe your existence to someone who views your sacrifices as their basic entitlement. True strength is knowing exactly when to let go of the rope. Legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you protect. If Angela's courage to reclaim her life inspired you today, please share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of quiet strength and absolute justice.